and I'll get to introductions here in just a second. For those of you who have not met me, again, my name is Bill Schmidt. I'm current chair of the board of the St. Louis Community Foundation and formerly serve as the managing partner of the Life Sciences family of funds for Cultivation Capital, a set of early stage venture capital funds. I'm not from St. Louis. I originally grew up in Milwaukee. Just a little background on myself. Job transfers took me here. And as the story goes, I met a girl. She said, just so you know, I'm never leaving St. Louis. 34 years later, here I am in the city. But I do care deeply about this city. It's part of the reason I agreed to jump on the board of the Community Foundation, and certainly a major reason why I agreed to chair the board this year. So I look back at my childhood too. One of our family vacations, if you can believe this had to be back in the mid-'70s, was to take a vacation to St. Louis. So I grew up in Milwaukee, and we came to St. Louis to see the brewery. We went to Six Flags. We saw the zoo. We had, and the city had all these great assets, and the city was really alive at that time. And look where we are today, let alone if we go back 120 years at the turn of last century, where we hosted the World's Fair, and it was the 4th largest city in the country. So we have some ways to go. I feel like our worst days are behind us and better days are ahead. And today we're here to talk about economic mobility. So I have a very, very esteemed group. Hang on one second here, I'll sit down. Very, very esteemed group of panelists here who, literally, when I look at my background, they put me to shame. There's a side of me that says, what the heck am I even doing here? They're fantastic. So to my left here, Sandra Moore, and I'm going to have each of them walk you through their own individual bios and accomplishments. But Sandra Moore, Managing Director of Advantage Capital. Sandra, thanks for joining us. I have Vihar Sheth, who is Managing Director of Affordable Housing at U.S. Bancorp and their Impact Finance Group. And then I also have William Rodgers III, Vice President and Director, Institute for Economic Equity for the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Each of you, thank you so much for taking the time to be here, and certainly you in the audience, thanks for coming here today. Why don't we start out with you, Sandra? I'd like each of you to take 3 or 4 minutes and just kind of walk us through your individual history and accomplishments.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So I'm a lawyer by training. I entered the law many years ago, more than 40 years ago, 45 as a matter of fact, to be a public interest lawyer. And I have done a dozen things in my career, but the through line to everything that I've ever worked on is that I wanted to be a lawyer so that I could work to change outcomes for poor people. And so the through line of my career carries that same thread. So I practiced law for 4 years representing poor people and legal aid. I then spent 11 years as an administrative judge at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and then went on to be a member of Governor Mel Carnahan's cabinet as the director of the Missouri Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, or what some people in states would call the Secretary of Labor and Industrial Relations. And it was there that I realized that the reason that I'd chosen the law is because I really wanted to shape public policy, because I wanted to help more people rather than be a transactional lawyer or an individual lawyer. So I kind of had that revelation. I never went back to the ordinary practice of law. I left there and went, joined Senator Jack Danforth in something called St. Louis 2004. Many in this room will remember it because I love my city and my region. Led work and employment stuff there, left there and went to work with Richard Barron as the president of Urban Strategies. All of these things are about community, they are about rebuilding, they are about changing outcomes for poor people. And in that journey, I got here this young woman who worked for me at Urban Strategies. I came to the conclusion that led me to where I am now, and that is that there simply was not enough philanthropy or public money to achieve the outcomes that I cared about, to change education, to change community infrastructure, that there had to be private investment, and it just happened to coincide with the big push in impact investing, and a few people came knocking at the door to say, do you want to come? Because you know what impact looks like on the ground. And I said yes, and leapt into private equity, or as my friends say, I crossed the street. And at Advantage Capital, I am a partner. I'm the first woman and the first Black partner in the firm. It's a 33-year-old firm, and I lead all of the impact investing aspects. Are we doing double bottom line outcomes for the money that we invest, since most of it is incentivized money? It's about $4.5 billion in assets under management on any given day.
Fantastic. Thank you. You can sense her passion, clearly. Vihar, why don't you go next?
Can you guys hear me as well? Okay. Hold on. Better? I'm Vihar Sheth. I am the Managing Director of Affordable Housing for U.S. Bank's Impact Finance Division. Based here in St. Louis, but we are a national organization that does impact investing based primarily around federal incentives to drive a whole number of outcomes. I lead a team of about 140 people at U.S. Bank that invests and lends nationally to finance multifamily rental housing, leveraging a federal program called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. It's the only permanent federal incentive that's existed since the mid-'80s that creates new and preserves affordable housing across the country. It's responsible for about 2 to 3 million units over that time. Our group invests and lends about $3 billion a year across the country, and 60 to 80 projects in urban areas, rural areas, serving all kinds of housing needs, from housing the unhoused, creating workforce housing, seniors, veterans, anything you like. And I've been with the bank 21 years, and it's kind of been a through line in terms of all the things that I think we're going to talk about in a hearing, that I felt scaling our ability to have impact in this space was my highest and best use. I'm an engineer by trade, kind of discovered placemaking in my late teens, early 20s, and realized they weren't just disparate things, and was shocked how long real estate actually took before the doors opened. And adjacent to that, involved in a number of other housing issues, because the tax credit I talked about does what it does very well, but it doesn't solve a lot of other problems, and there are lots of gaps where all of you may be able to come in. I also serve on the board of the Tower Grove CDC, which is a nonprofit board serving 3 neighborhoods around Tower Grove Park, working on economic development in that area. So I will stop there and hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, and it's wonderful to have the opportunity to speak in front of you and share some of my thoughts, but more, I'm really interested in wanting to hear what you all are having, or your feeling and thoughts are. I'm probably the newest resident to St. Louis. I had been commuting from New Jersey to St. Louis for about 2.5 years. Not weekly, but I had back in the fall, I had one too many of those times in the evening where I'm supposed to be home at 10, and I got home at 3, and so we said it's time. It's time to come out, and it also reminded me of an experience when I was at the College of William and Mary, my first job out of grad school. And I was just starting to do some community-based research, and some of the work got out there about, I call this two-reality experience for blacks and whites in Williamsburg, and it made a splash, and it was done in a different way. It wasn't done in a wagging your finger at folks. It was done in a way of, these are the losses, these are the disadvantages that we face if we could allow this persist. Well, about a week later, after one of my essays got printed, I get the call from the secretary of the Reverend from the First Baptist Church. And it's, the Reverend would like to have lunch with you. And you probably know where this is going. But so we met, and the first thing out of his mouth goes, what are your intentions here? What are your intentions? And I said, well, here's my background, here's what I want to do. And he said, okay, because the reason why I asked you is that a lot of people like you come and then, they, as he said, stir up trouble or create, and then you leave. And I said, well, I do not anticipate that being my case. That I'm the product, I'm a PhD economist, but I'm the product of a social worker, my mom, and then my father who's a computer scientist engineer. So that's how you get an economist. So, a caring economist, we like to say. and so, even to this day, Mom had a stroke last year, so it's been a little difficult. But we always would have like our weekly or bi-weekly econ chat, where she's always asking me questions about the economy, about issues of race. And one of our favorite stories was I had some of my work with the co-author Richard Freeman got published in front page above the full New York Times back in 1999 in the summer. And she was up one morning reading her local Democrat and Chronicle paper, sees this study and says, oh, this is an interesting study. It looks like these people are doing some good work. And then she gets to the second paragraph and it's like, oh, that's my son. and so the reason why I share those personal stories is prior to coming to the bank, I felt a lot of my work was dress rehearsal. So dress rehearsal in the sense of helping the United Way of Northern New Jersey create the Alice concept. I'm Alice's brother. I helped to create that concept. Or having the experience of working for Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan and taking a bus back in the day where you could drive along Pennsylvania Avenue next to the White House and seeing men sleeping in middle of January on these grates and questioning the argument that, oh, this is just about personal responsibility, that these men made poor choices. And that was the beginning of my journey of starting to study economics. So fast forwarding to where we are today, the Federal Reserve here created something called the Institute for Economic Equity a little more than 3 years ago. They did a national search for director, and my name kept on coming up with their suggestions. And people have said to me, why would you come to St. Louis at your age? My kids, and I said, my kids are all young adults, and if they boomerang home, I leave the window open and they move the boomerang right back out the window. They can stay, but you keep on moving. And so I've been very blessed that they're doing well. But the other big thing too is that my father is from the district. My father is from Memphis. And so a large part of me feels as this is a coming home, coming in circle to where I can have the opportunity to do this work. What's different about the work we're doing at the Institute? Well, we have something we call DAN, where DAN stands for Data, Analysis, and Narrative. And I spend a lot of my time on the narrative piece. So some of the stuff I'm going to talk with you about today is some narratives around like a business case for why we need to pursue economic equity. You can still talk about social justice, but many of our friends, are going to be much more swayed and moved by, a business case. The other, and so that's the narrative piece. And right now, it's an interesting, good time that we're chatting. We are sort of shifting in some of our research that we're going to be doing, and we're very applied in terms of what we do. That we translate it such that, right, you don't need a PhD to understand it. But we're going to be shifting, staying with our vulnerable workers population, and so these are individuals who have lower employment opportunities, lower wages, and also, most importantly, sensitive to macro change. So when the job openings start to fall, they're the first ones to get hit. We are also, so that's that group. We're also shifting to rural prosperity. Right? That's an area that we have not really focused on a great deal, and not just ourselves. And then the other is either financial well-being or financial inclusion. Those are going to be our three buckets, our three pillars that we're going to be moving towards. So look forward to sharing with you much more, not just today, but in the future, and also learning from you all too. So.
Very good. Thank you for sharing that background, each of you. St. Louis has some deeply rooted systemic challenges as it relates to the wealth gap, as we've just heard many of you say. The Community Foundation has laid out key strategies to help close that wealth gap. According to the Upward Mobility Project, factors that impact upward economic mobility include economic success, a feeling of personal dignity, a sense of belonging, a belief that you have the power to impact your own destiny, as well as a feeling of autonomy that you actually can indeed make an impact for yourself. The question for the panel here is, do you agree with those factors? And are there any additional factors that you think are really important or relevant to help close that wage gap wealth gap. Sandra, I'll go to you first.
Sure, I agree with all of those things. There are two components to those things. One is pure economics. I think that's the first thing that comes out when it says economic success. And the other is self-awareness and well-being, personal well-being. And I think that's absolutely correct, that those two things have to go together. I would add to that entrepreneurship, with business growth and development being one of the most important ways to close the wealth gap, particularly if it is business growth and development that drives job creation. Because in my years of experience on both sides of this fence, the closing of the wealth gap requires two things. It requires closing the wealth gap at the top end, which is where business growth and development and entrepreneurism sit, but it also requires closing the wage gap. So, and that requires business to create and drive jobs that pay wages that make it possible to close the wage gap. So I agree with all of that, and I would add entrepreneurism and business growth and development as to that wonderful list.
Yep, couldn't agree more. You're talking to an entrepreneur himself, and I felt a certain responsibility to even pay it forward, to begin to mentor startups. This goes back about a decade now after I exited my company. So, Vihar, comments from you?
I'd frame it around the housing kind of formula. These discussions are incredibly complex with many interdependent factors. But you can't really address variables if they're all moving, and so you need to fix certain ones. And I think housing is one of the biggest ones to fix, so that people have a stable place to relaunch their lives every day. And I think that fixing that piece of the puzzle can allow you then to address, because I feel like with a lot of these formulas, we play whack-a-mole a lot, and we address the symptoms, we don't address the causes, we move the needle on something, there's a distraction, some other piece of the formula carries more weight, and then we have this meeting again next year with no change, right, in outcomes or metrics. And so as we continue this conversation, we think about what this group can do. Addressing that 35,000 unit need is not the holy grail of solutions, but I think it's a huge piece of the overall puzzle that can help move a lot of these levers. And it's not just the production of housing, sometimes it's policies, it's things that keep hardworking people who have achieved work growth out of stable housing, things like the Thurman Amendment, which keeps people who've sold drugs at some point in their life, even though it's not a predictive factor, out of housing for the rest of their lives. Those are the types of things we can address too. So it's not just necessarily new units, and we need supply everywhere of all kinds in every county in this country. And one stat, two stats I'll leave you with as we continue this conversation. One, the tax credit program that I work on is advertised as the largest subsidy of housing in the country, and it's actually not, and it is dwarfed by the one all of us in this room take advantage of, which is the home mortgage interest deduction, which is cost the government 100 times more money than the tax credit. So perspective on terms of where we advocate for change. And the other stat is that there's not a single county in the United States, not one, where the average wage can afford the average two-bedroom apartment. And so all the things that we're talking about conspire to make a lot of that stuff happen. But as we continue to get housing production, we need to do the things to speed it up, to make it cheaper, and just do more of that. And I think that, from, again, my limited view in the housing space, is that is the foundation. And once you start fixing that, you can start tackling some of these other things about job training, et cetera. But you could send someone to school, and if they don't have anywhere to go home to, it's not going to stick.
I forgot to do something I'm supposed to do. And my Fed colleagues are chuckling. I needed to say, and then that everything I said to you, and now going forward, are my own views and thoughts.
Not of the Federal Reserve.
Not of the Federal Reserve or Chairman Powell.
We were about to ask you what was going to happen.
I'll double click on that. I'll double click on that.
No revisionist history.
So,
disclaimer. Accept.
what I love about the words that you've chosen, is that they really get at the fundamental sort of set of needs that people people need desire and have. And so the two words additional words that I'd add, and they're captured in those too, but I want them explicitly there: hope and agency. Right? Hope and what? And agency. Yeah. And some of our recent work on young individuals, 18 to 24, where we examine or study depression and anxiety amongst this population, you've seen a dramatic jump in depression rates, and they've separated from adults. The 18 to 24 years, it's been rising faster than it is for adults. Lots of reasons and explanations for it, but the bottom line is what's happening with many of those young people is the loss of hope. Right? And once you lose hope, from an economist, that leads to you valuing other people less, valuing yourself less, right? To where you then start to take and go down behaviors that are detrimental to yourself, detrimental to your family, detrimental to your community. So the hope is really, really important. Related is agency, is that ability to be able to make decisions, to have a locus of control. And then the third I would add on is isolation, or we need to improve or lessen the isolation that people feel. And what this is really getting at is, for me, as I was saying, prior to coming to St. Louis, this was a dress rehearsal. Since being here with the pandemic, and I describe it also as a sort of a whack-a-mole game, except the moles don't wait to come up, right? When you've got one halfway down, the next one's starting to come up, and we've been experiencing that. And so the pandemic exacerbated the feelings of isolation that many people have, and we're seeing in many statistics that things have not reversed. The other, or diminished. The other area that I would also want to put on, and this is less of these 30,000-foot words and concepts, is this idea of what the United Nations calls human priority investments. Human priority investments. And these are our community's public investments in not only human capital, so education and training, but social capital. Okay? Social capital. So that can range from social insurance, such as an unemployment insurance, right? To help cushion the job loss, and particularly certain groups face more. It also encompasses health care, Medicaid, Medicare, right? That type of insurance. Then you also have survivors. Many of us are unfortunate. We lose a loved one, a primary caregiver in their 20s or 30s. And so there's a whole host of safety nets or supports that we need to also make sure that we're having in place. And if you do that, along with these other types of investments, then we have a much better shot at growing our economy.
Agreed. Very good. One of the comments from Dr. Adams in his initial presentation here was the $35,000 affordable housing shortage here in St. Louis, and 7.5 million, I believe you said, nationwide. Vihar, I'll come to you with this question first, and the others can comment as well. But what are some of the root causes of that? And furthermore, I'd probably like to layer in as well. What because of that singular issue, what type of stresses does it put on the entire region economically?
Yeah, how much time do we have? Yeah, so I think there's supply constraints in general at every price level is the problem. We need more housing for rich people. We need more housing for middle-income people. We need more housing for the unhoused, et cetera. There's a whole host of things that conspire. I mean, there's everything from zoning, there's NIMBYism, there's the lack of subsidy. Those are the types of different factors, I think, that go into play. We have issues around the units that are subsidized coming out of the program. So one of the things I lament the most is that the stock of affordable housing doesn't often grow, but the need has grown. I've been doing this 21 years, and I think that $7.5 million number is accurate for people spending more than 30% of their income on housing. But that was like half as big when I started. So it doesn't feel like I'm succeeding at all. And there's a lot of different things that go into that. We have additional special unique attributes in St. Louis with fragmented governments and the like. But we need to think about what are the highest impact changes that we can make to accelerate unit creation. And I want to make sure we think about the system in general, because it's not just about subsidy. One of the things that we talk about in our industry too, and there's federal legislation to enhance some of the subsidies that we use to build affordable housing, is that if you increase the tax credit amount, that doesn't mean additional skilled carpenters are going to show up. It doesn't mean, and Neil had to leave us, that there are more people in SLDC to approve things. It doesn't mean the city has another permit officer. So there are so many single points of failure in getting someone into a home that it's shocking. And we will put projects online in places like DC, and their entry system to get people off the street takes 18 months to get someone from who's sleeping on one of those grates into a unit that is ready to sleep in. 18 months, it sits open. In places like California, we open projects, and because of wildfires, electric switches aren't available because the power companies have bought them all. So you'll have a project that's done, and it has no connection to the power grid for a year. So when we think about the systems, there's an infinite number of things that can go wrong. We need to figure out the ones that we can impact to move the needle the most, and it's really about increasing supply at the end of the day. And if you're not doing something that's increasing supply, it's probably not the highest best use time or money.
I'd like to add,
Yeah, sure.
and Vihar, we spent a lot of time
Yeah.
in the same lane. I agree with everything that he said. There's a qualification I would make. Affordable quality housing is critical, because we've made huge investments in this country in housing as shelter, much of which is now being torn down because it was never quality housing. And quality housing is the mainstay and the backstop against continued mobility and NIMBYism. NIMBYism is a function of the stigmatization that has happened from poor quality housing being thrown up with public dollars everywhere. Remember, I told you that I got driven to the private equity side of the fence. We do a lot of deals with this man and his company, because this is one place where the private sector really can do a much better job. Yes, I'm sorry, not in my backyard. So when you start to bring, you talk about the need to increase housing production, it is absolutely true. Increase affordable housing production, absolutely true. But you can't get that housing in the great neighborhoods where there is also opportunity. For education, for transportation, you can't get those into neighborhoods like this one because of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And that's because of all of the stigmatization that has happened over the last 90 years with what's called public housing. So adding quality is very, very important. And I have to stay here for just 30 seconds, because when you add quality, it so increases the cost of the production of the housing. And in this country, what the public dollar doesn't want to pay for is quality. So the housing, the capital stack to build quality, affordable housing has constantly got huge holes in it, even with LIHTC, even with all of the subsidy, if you want to build quality. So you get things like cutting out washers and dryers because that's expensive. But then you have a family, a working family, or a very low-income family, a working poor family, and they can't keep their kids' clothes clean. What does that do to self-esteem when you have to go to school with dirty clothes on for the price of a washing machine or a dryer? But it's not frivolous, because it can increase the per unit cost of that housing. If you're talking about 500 units of housing, and you trying to put washers and dryers in them. So it's a very complex problem. We're getting at it. I don't want us to feel like we aren't getting at it, but adding quality is so important, because if it's quality, I can take you places where affordable housing has been built to a quality standard, and it has existed for 25 or 30 years. I just have to go there. How many of you all like the Central West End, right? Mm-hmm. And how many of you like, Westminster Place and some of those streets back there? Well, if you go to the Schnook store on the corner of Lindell and whatever that is, right, Sarah, and you go back 2 blocks, you're going to see lots of affordable housing. Housing built with LIHTC that is 25, 30 years old. That young docs and young nurses now live in. You would not know that. So quality is really important to increasing production and beating down the desire, the inclination that I don't want this housing in my neighborhood.
Well said. Yeah. William, anything to add there?
I think I'm going to mainly I'm on my listening tour. But there's one thing I would say that I think does connect, and maybe it follows from what you all were saying. Prior to coming here, I was on Governor Murphy's back in New Jersey. He created a public bank implementation board. And one of the things that really left with me or stayed with me, and that is the capitalization process, right? And the theme that we were really working on and trying to figure out is how do you create patient capital, right? Because to have the quality, right, you've got to, I believe, right, using a variety of dollars, and some it's going to be private. And so how do you, right? And that's where we're not doing this actively right now. We're going to start working in housing a bit, but that's as an example where can we rethink the narratives around why it would be good to have patient capital, right? And to where you can flip it around and say, oh wow, it's beneficial for not only the community, but it's also even beneficial for these private sector individuals or investors.
Right. In terms of net worth, housing itself is a major portion of personal wealth in the United States, right? Based upon some of the data that you may have probably already seen with the Federal Reserve, what are some of the best ways that you see that individuals or households in general can increase their net worth?
Well, I'm limited in terms of what I can say in terms of the specificity of
in your own
program.
words.
Well, not so much even in my own words. Now, no. I was told when I came to the bank that the level that you're at and higher, you've lost your own voice. There's no more in your own words. So someone here will another cocktail party or whatever say, I heard Rodgers.
I heard that.
So, but we are really at the beginning of our work in housing. But from what we have done in terms of the wealth work with our 2 colleagues, Lowell Ricketts and Anna Kent, that they've kind of summarized basically four main areas. One is helping families build or have a rainy day fund, and this is not rocket science. Right. This is not rocket science. It reminds me of my dear friend Hugh Price, who was the president of the Urban League for the longest time, where he said in one of the State of Black Americas that we know what we need to do in many cases. In most cases, it's just having the courage or the political courage, right, to be able to move in that direction. So number 1 was the rainy day fund. 2 is promoting early in life investments. 3 is examining college cost, and then 4 is it's all about supporting all forms of housing, increasing the supply of affordable rental housing while promoting passive sustainable home ownership. And they talk about taking or having home ownership as being kind of this capstone financial event and not a first step. In terms of, and then also you want to be building this diverse balance sheet. What's been interesting about some of the wealth numbers in the last few years has been the gap has actually gotten bigger, and it's gotten bigger because of the value of non-residential types of assets. so stock market, right? And there's a racial, still continue racial difference between, right, those groups. But you're all right in terms of where does one start. Housing is probably the best place because, as you said, and I agree, it is the largest asset that most Americans or U.S. individuals will hold.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of perverse things happening in that math, right? Because part of it is the supply constraint of housing causes the demand go up, which causes the house to become a disproportionately large percentage of your assets if you are able to own one to begin with, right? And so some of the things to increase housing supply actually decreases the appreciation of homes. And I remember Robert Shiller, the Case-Shiller Index economist, was talking a lot of, we've gotten into this loop, and especially after the financial crisis where the housing price crashed, he said, if you buy something and you sell it for the same price, you didn't lose money because you actually had a place to live the whole time. Right? So a lot of us have gotten drunk on this 8, 10, 12, 30% appreciation, right? And in some ways, we don't want to do anything to stop it because it's going to slow down the appreciation of our homes. So we're not actively resisting it, but you look the other way, whatever. Now, the flip side of it is home ownership is not for everybody. It is one of the things that is the primary driver of wealth, but I'd ask you to think about the inversion of the overall math problem, because a lot of the people we're talking about aren't close to homeownership. That might be a destination. But what they are people who spend more than 30% of whatever money they have on housing. So the first thing to fix is to make sure 70 cents of every dollar they earn, they can do something else with. And that is educate their children, clothe their children, pay for their health care, start a savings account. It doesn't matter if they own a home or not, in my perspective to begin with. That could be a destination. Now once you have that mobility, choosing to own a home may not be your path. You may decide you want to do something else with your money. You may decide you want to be a renter and invest in your business, or you may decide you want to be a renter and do something else, right? So sometimes I feel like we're starting the conversation at a destination that is either so far off for people or not the choice that they would make, that we lose sight of some of the immediate things that we could do. And the other thing is that there is incredible lumpiness in the types of housing available. So what we have is some level of shelter for the unhoused. Then we actually have a pretty big gap for people who don't make very much money, almost nothing, under 30% of the area median income. Then we have the tax credit program that I work on that creates thousands and thousands of units a year for people earning 30% to about 60% of the area median income. Then we have what's a growing problem, it's called the missing middle, that is from 60% of the area median income to whatever the kind of average wages that can afford a home. So we also have a dynamic, and this has become incredibly kind of tragic in my space, is that people in affordable housing that is built with LIHTC, that is federally regulated, private sector finance, that is high quality, creates community of scale, they have permanence in those units once they get in there. But what they don't have is anywhere near the earning potential to leave that and buy a home. There's like a $100,000 income gap between pricing yourself out of being eligible for a 60% tax credit unit and buying a starter home. And that gap is growing. So it's not a dimmer switch in terms of the mobility of people, because the supply production is incredibly out of whack. And so you will fall into these chasms as an individual, which actually could cause you to regress, because now you went from spending 30% of your money to 80% of your money because you bought a home. And then you can't afford the home insurance, and you can't afford the tuck pointing, and all these other things happen. And so, again, I'm not knocking home ownership. There are days I don't want to own my house, but it generally has been a good thing. But we should think about the continuum, and we should think about the inverse problem. We're talking about changing people's lives. Give them 70 cents on a dollar back in any way you can, and a lot of things will get better.
That's where.
I want to make certain that you all can see graphically what Vihar has just talked about. And the way to help you see the picture is that the healthiest communities in the world have an array of housing tenure. And that's a term of art in the housing business about whether it's rental housing or whether it's home ownership or whether it's condos or whether it's single family, so tenure. So you look around here. This is not a community where everybody owns a home. This is something that we think about when we talk about poor neighborhoods and think everybody, but you look around here, there's rental housing, there's single family housing, there's multifamily rentals, there's condo ownership, all right here in our beloved Clayton. So what has to happen, this is why this whole question of quality and NIMBYism is so important, is you have to be willing to invest to create housing tenure, because to get what we say, what Vihar says, what we need is for people to be able to grow from one tenure to the next. They need to be able to start in, my husband and I just a few years ago bought a condo for our son here in Clayton. He has some disabilities. He needs to be in a very safe neighborhood. Well, there's a little neighborhood back there. There's just what do they call them? Studio units.
Yep.
He has one big living room and a little kitchen and a bedroom, but it's safe, and there are lots of young people who start there. But then they need to be able, and around here they can. They work a while, then they can go to a 2-bedroom unit that they can rent, and they continue, and their kids can go to good schools. But we don't think about that. We think of affordable housing in silos, and we want to put it in a place, and that's going to solve the problem. When my dear friend Maxine here and the Del Mar Divine really takes a more comprehensive approach to creating a neighborhood where there can be housing tenure. And that creates more the choice that you want, a person who can get in their community and stay there and decide, do I want to own a home, or do I want to just get a bigger apartment and stay in a nice school district? Or, and we've forgotten about the importance of comprehensive neighborhood development in the solutions that we seek for economic mobility. I hope that makes some sense and you could see the picture.
Well, yeah, for me, you're capturing is the word I threw out at the beginning, and that's agency. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. Can I ask a question of you all, maybe the group too? What's been the role that businesses, in many cases from outside of communities, coming in and buying a lot of the apartment stock?
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Right.
In our neighborhood, a lot is done by people that live in New York and New Jersey, and they don't really.
Careful, I'm from Jersey now.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking with you. Yeah.
You can't reach you when you need to tell
Right.
them that
Yeah.
they're.
So if you think about Ferguson, we suffered mightily through all that happened after the death of Michael Brown. Prior to that time, Ferguson was largely a little bungalow ownership community. And you went up the scale. What they call Southeast Ferguson now didn't have a name until Michael Brown died there, was just Ferguson. And you could go all the way to the historic district, which has wonderful, beautiful old homes, had lots of housing tenure there. Now, in the neighborhoods surrounding where that tragic event happened, typically now called Southeast Ferguson, that flipped from 70% home ownership to about 30% home ownership, most of it owned by the Chinese. No ding there. It's just to give you an idea that there is absolutely no way to keep vitality in that community when you strip out the center of it, which was the homeowner.
Yeah, let me make a couple of points. I think there's a question in the audience. So related to that, too, to contextualize, I think, different facets of this. You have delinquent landlords, which a lot of, I think, what Maxine is talking about in North City. You also have homes being tax shelters for the wealthy who buy up and don't occupy property. You see this exacerbated in places like Miami and New York and things like that. And then you have private equity that has come in and absorbed large swaths of homes by the tens of thousands, mostly to the detriment of communities. So there's multiple dynamics operating on this factor in terms of the things that might restrict sales, construction, liquidity, those types of things. And then to top all of that, we had such an inflection in the interest rates, as many of you know about the lock-in that people have that is restricting their ability to move because the math problem is so upside down for them that they just have to stay put because it would be 2 to 3 times as much in monthly mortgage payments to get the same house down the street, right? And so they're just not going anywhere, and some of that might start abating with the rate cuts. So I don't know if we're taking questions from the audience, but they're...
And it's the other way. It's now 70% owned. They were homeowners, 30% renters, and it is now flipped to 70% renters, largely owned by people out of the country, and 30% homeowners.
This is the tax shelter thing, because people who have incredible wealth... Yeah. I'm sorry?
Why do the Chinese need tax?
Well, I think it's anywhere where assets can be seized. So you see a lot of like Brazilian money in Miami, like entire high rises are bought by people who don't come here, but they're parking money here because it's less likely to go somewhere than in their home governments. Yeah.
One question I wanted to touch on, or one issue, is a topic of, for example, advantage capital and impact investing, and how can that sector work alongside with philanthropic, entities or philanthropy in general to really drive, a greater impact? What's been your experience there?
So it's been wild, I tell you that. It's been a big, tall learning experience, but it's been beautiful because what I didn't know about finance on the private equity side, I've been learning, and what they don't know at all about how to invest for impact, I've been teaching. So it's a great world when you can both learn and teach. Now, to answer your question, the partnership that we need with philanthropy, and you won't like my answer, but those of you who know me know I'm not shy. We really need you to be willing to take more risk in the middle market. We really need that because philanthropy and government investment through tax credits and that kind of thing de-risk our deals so that we can take our private sector piece and drive to change that we couldn't otherwise get, and particularly in markets like St. Louis. So we invest a lot of money in St. Louis and people don't necessarily see it because it's in, one of the things I learned in the private equity field, everybody likes to be real quiet, right? so you don't know that we've got.
Our wins.
You don't know how much is invested. I love telling the story that that Advantage Capital was one of the first investors 25 years ago in something called the Center for Emerging Technologies. Nobody would know that, but that is the birth of Cortex.
Yep.
And so we really need philanthropy to be willing to come in with us more concessionary than you are, because you come in with us and you want the same market rate that everybody else does, and de-risk so we can do more. And then with government, hold us more accountable. That is what I love best about public-private partnerships. Yes, ma'am. If I could just finish off a tiny bit on this point. It requires a couple of things, though. I'm asking you to understand that philanthropy de-risk and allows those private sector dollars to flow to things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. And then also be willing to observe, but not necessarily be able to track down to every house where every dollar went, because accountability systems are important. But having been for 16 years the president of a not-for-profit that did nothing but affordable housing, sometimes I hated to get a grant. It's the worst thing in the world.
I'll take that.
I hated to get it because I couldn't focus on the families that I was supposed to be helping to build houses for filling out the grant reports.
Yeah.
1/16 of a cent off, and you can spend have a team member spend, and Neela was on my team, have a team member spend 2.5 weeks looking for 6 pennies. So there has to be an accountability system, but realizing if you're de-risking it, you don't want to jam up the people filling out paperwork that isn't telling you anything anyway. I could write anything on that paper. You weren't there.
I gotta add, because I think Sandra is like so on point. You can't take market risk and expect market returns and call it philanthropy. So that's one. You're a bank if that's what you're doing, because that's what I do all day long. There are variables to fix in the beginning of the time scale, and then there are dollars needed at the end to get things over the hump. Everything in the middle, there's generally capital for, because it's the middle, it's the standard deviation of risk. And that's where banks operate, right? That's where large-scale PE operates, and they'll take more risk than I'll take, but they still have systems and scale. I have a regulator to answer to. I can't just make up whatever I want. You can. And what you can do is join me and hand the baton off. So when I talked about all these variables, land is a huge issue. If you would go out, the proverbial you, and just say, hey, these are good pieces of property that might get swooped up by a market rate developer to put yet another chain store or super high-end housing on, but maybe I can just lock it down and then work with a nonprofit who's going to preserve affordable housing. Oftentimes it's stopped because the land cost is too high to make the rest of it work. So that's first money in. A lot of times we're near the end and there's a gap in the budget. I can only lend so much based on loan-to-value covenants and loan-to-cost calculations, but there's $1 million missing in the deal. So the risky part of it is put a soft loan into the deal. Let's close. Let's get people into housing. You will probably get your money back based on cash flow. That's the risk you have to take. But you also done is created housing that would not have otherwise been created. Right. And so I think Sandra's point is great, because if I have to send less information to the OCC than she has to send to a grant maker, we've completely lost the plot. And I think that's the part where philanthropy can change really the equation and accelerate a lot of the things that continue to be stifled and not move as fast. And it starts reporting, and it's internal too. I mean, there's reporting we do.
The tax credit, it's like not worth it.
So Maxine, that's a fair point, but I'm talking about different scales. So my product, maybe not, but my other role as a board member of the Tower Grove CDC, we do one house at a time. We do 4 houses at a time. We preserve apartment buildings that might get converted from affordability to market rate. So those are 4 units, 10 units, 12 units, 1 unit that might need a lot. So you can build a house that's financed by a federal program that allows it to be sold by someone who doesn't have the income requirements because they get a discount on the mortgage. So totally fair point, but I think there are various points of scale.
Restoration of existing homes that are.
I think all of these things, we can't boil the ocean. But when I think conceptually about first money and fixing something that's variable and getting something across the 1 yard line, to me, from where I sit, that is where the highest and best used dollars can come from. And if you think about the large scale stuff in this space that I work in, you think about Microsoft, you think about, her name is escaping me, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, Mackenzie Scott. She that's what she does, right? And that's scale. So it costs up to $1 million a unit to build affordable housing in the state of California. That's dumb and not something I can solve, but it's got to get built. And so to get that last $10 million over the line so that the construction starts, that's where she comes in from a philanthropic standpoint. Now, it can't all be grants, I get that. Some of it can be low interest loans, some of it can be patient capital. Whoever was talking about that, where you're waiting a little bit. I think that's the differentiation on this risk kind of equation. But if it's the same money as the bank, the same priority, the same interest rates, we're not really solving a problem.
We're coming up on time here, but William, I did want to address, you authored a book titled The Handbook on the Economics of Discrimination. What were some of the main...
That was a long time ago.
What were some of the main themes of that
away.
book? And in particular, could you talk a little bit about what needs to happen in order to increase wages, where at least at minimum they're keeping up with the standard cost of living?
Yeah. So picture this little simple relationship, and we'll build on it. That economic growth is the sum or the approximate sum of productivity growth, labor productivity growth, and population growth, right? Where productivity growth is basically how fast someone or workers can do, right, a task. And ideally, in an ideal world, in our economics world, people get paid their productivity. So number one then is making sure that we're making investments or choices that help people be as productive as they can, right? So number one, the pandemic, what did it show to us around childcare, right? That the system is broken, yet many families did and have and continue to rely on, right, needing and having good access to childcare. And actually the work that I had done with ALICE, ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained and Employed, and it's basically the share of households in your community that can't meet a survival budget. Okay? And one of the largest components of that survival budget is childcare. Right? There's a whole host of other, right, barriers or hurdles that we study and focus on at the Institute that, again, make it harder for people to be productive. So transportation is another big challenge that individuals face. We also have so transportation, childcare, mental health has become, right, a huge. It has been actually really. If you read the work of Angus Deaton and Ann Case called "Deaths of Despair," the pandemic just further amplified or really shone a light on the problems or the challenges that individuals are having. And there's a variety of other factors that are out there that make it harder for people to engage, right, in work. Once you're in work, right, there's not a guarantee that you're going to get paid what you feel or what the market values you. And so because of that, we also then need to have what are called institutions play a role in wage setting, right? Union members will earn more than non-union members on average. And you especially see it by race. If you're a black union member, you earn more. And there's been a great deal of research to show that people who are members of unions, on average, they're more productive. Right? And the productivity gains come from, yes, the work that they're doing, but also, as one of my advisors, Richard Freeman, he coined or created this concept called exit voice. That actually, if you have a good functioning labor management relationship, you're sharing ideas and comparing ideas. So that's one way for you to think about it. Minimum wage is another way to where research has shown. And actually, what's happened is because of the tight labor market that we've had over the last few years, right? The wage growth that we've seen that has stayed ahead of inflation has been at the lowest part of the wage distribution. The Economic Policy Institute, others, and I have some preliminary work that shows this. But the thing that we're looking at to show is that a large part of that increase in growth at the lower part of the wage distribution is because of minimum wages. Well, you're saying, well, we haven't had a federal increase since 2009. What's happening? Well, you have like 30 states that have unilaterally over the last few years have been increasing their minimum wages, right? And it started out in 2020 where you're looking at about 12 to 13 states every January we're going from $8 to $9 an hour. Then you go the next year, it's now 9 to 10. And in this past January, you have a whole host of states that are moving it from 14 to 15, 15 to 16. And the economy and the labor market still has grown and done quite well. The other and the final thing I'll mention in the context of your question, and this gets at some of our narrative work that we do at the Institute, and we've estimated that if we were to pursue greater racial equality in terms of household incomes, that's an additional $7.5 billion in disposable income that would come into the metro area. It's about 3% of the area's GDP. Okay. We also have shown, using the Alice concept, where punchline here, when Alice hurts, we all hurt. And what does that mean? Well, we have a chart that we made that shows Alice's budget lines, housing, food, clothing, and other items. And there's a column that talks about a narrative of what does it mean for Alice if she doesn't have those. Great. But the most important column is the next column that talks about what does it mean for the community. And when I say community, I don't mean someone who's in your neighborhood. I mean someone who also could live on the other side of town, right? Or who could live in a particular part of the area. And that community is a bigger and broader concept. And so when you aggregate up the number of Alice families that have to use the emergency room as their health care, when you aggregate up the number of families in your community that don't have access to good quality child care, right? That does what? Go back to our equation. Economic growth is the sum of population growth and productivity growth, right? And all of this feeds right back to productivity. And so one of the things I like to talk about is, yes, when we're investing in infrastructure, yes, it's roads, bridges, right, transportation, but it's also the human priorities. It's child care, right? It is elder care, right? Anything that affects people's ability to work, and to be able not just to work for the sake of it, but to be able to be in those jobs where they're going to have it's a fair workplace and it's a safe workplace. And as my old boss, the labor secretary, used to said, it's about making the promise of America still be the practice of America. But it all starts locally. And again, I'm so grateful to be a part of this conversation.
Very good. We're already actually past our time here. This has been a fantastic interaction between you here who attended and also our panelists. Are there any questions that anybody would like to ask?
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And one of the things I like to talk about is shifting to a budget of need. And what I mean by that is let's figure out as a community where we want people to be, right? In terms of their people's lifestyle or what they're, right? And then let's figure out how to finance that, as opposed to starting the conversation off, well, this, we have the budget constraint. This is how much we can spend, right? And then it locks you into, well, what our experiences are. So
yeah, and you could, I mean, I wax philosophical here. I think I think this effort is to generate the hope, right? Because I mean, if you're on the receiving end of a lot of these things, it's hard. But if you attack a problem in a system and you don't stop until the system starts behaving differently, then people will see that it's possible, and that's where they'll get hope. And I think the point of this conversation and where we can allocate some of these resources is to keep attacking a system until it changes, and then all the people who are victims of that system will start generating that. And I think it's hard right now for people.
Yeah. And one of the things that we're doing, and it's something new for us, but in our latest work, particularly with young people, we've gone further than just giving you the evidence, and are starting to profile organizations like you mentioned, or other organizations. There's one in Paducah, Kentucky, that we profile as a part of the conversation of saying, but I think you raised the point of, well, how do we go to scale, right?
I'd like to say something here, though. I agree. The only way you change anything is one thing at a time, and but there are very few places that are like this room. This is a room where people have the opportunity to do what I tell happens at my firm. We drive change from the top down and the bottom up. The average people out in the world do not have the opportunity to do what you all can do, and that is to drive change from the top down and the bottom up. It feels a lot better driving it from the bottom up. You can see your outcomes, you can see your results, but there has to be somebody who's willing to drive it from the top down, and that's you all. You can tell me, we'll put money with you at Vantage Capital. We don't do individual funds, but just as an example, if we did, We'll put money with you, but we want these outcomes. That's driving change from the top down. So I know it is important. No human being can succeed unless they can first see a vision of what success looks like. I get that. But no individual can succeed in a system that does not shift, and you all are system shifters. So I want you to feel real good, but I want y'all to work real hard, driving the change from the top down.
Yeah, and to add to that, Dream Builders is an amazing program.
It's wonderful.
But why does it exist? Why did two black guys have to create that to help other black guys? That's the problem you should be solving, right? So helping Dream Builders
We're
is
gonna get
amazing.
out of here. Stop it.
What? No. Well, I mean, yeah, if we're just talking, we're talking. We don't have to do anything, but we're talking about system change and how to do all these things, right? That is exactly what Sandra articulated, is that we got to close in and flank the problem from both sides. And there are incredible people working because sometimes they have no other choice than to do things like that. And let's give them more choices.